today. Solving equations involving fractions. It's such a good lesson because if you're a little foggy on the whole solving equations thing from before the break, all that other equation solving, everything else I've taught you about equation solving is in this lesson. So if it's a little foggy and you don't remember it, it's inside here. Second piece of good news. You look at those fractions and you're like, oh, here we go with the fractions. You had to bring fractions in there? Watch what I can do with fractions when they're in equations. And that's the big point I got to make today is this only works, what I'm about to do, when you're in an equation. Now, you have to watch the first example. And there's a little mystery in the first example about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then by the end of that example, hopefully someone can say, I know how you chose what to do. And then from there on in, that's the game. Okay. What I'm going to do is I look at this equation. X plus 5 over 3 equals negative 15. And I look at this situation and I go, oh, here we go. Fractions. Great. If only there was a way to get rid of the fractions till the end of the question. And there is. Here's the magic move I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation by 3. That's my plan. Maybe you already can see through it and you go, I know why you chose 3. Good. Lesson over. Because wait till you see what this does to the situation. I'm going to take this side of the equation. I'm going to go 3 times this side. And I'm going to go 3 times this side. Because let me rewind a bit from what we said about equations, is that you can do anything you want to an equation as long as you do the same to both sides. And I really encourage you to get all these steps down the first time, to write all this down carefully. Because when you're doing these questions for homework, you want to have something to refer back to and go, what did he do here? Okay, the right side, pretty easy stuff. 3 times negative 15. And when you see that negative 45, you're unimpressed by my little move here. You're like, all you've done is make the numbers bigger. You're right. But watch what happens over here. When there's a number in front of a set of brackets, we mean multiply. And not just multiply, multiply by each thing that's in there. Do you remember the arrows? We've been doing that for a couple of chapters now. So I'm going to multiply each of these things in the numerator by the 3. So what I get is 3x plus 15, and that's all over 3. You might have a question there, and you should have a question there, which is, what about the bottom? You didn't multiply the bottom by 3. I'm like, yeah. When you need to think it out, you really should think of that as 3 over 1. And so what I'm multiplying the bottom by is just the 1. And I'll do that every time. Wait. If you're confused in that at all, I'm going to do that every single time. Now look at this. Now's when you completely lose faith in Mr. Todd on a Tuesday. You go, well, that didn't make it better. All you did was make the numbers bigger. And I go, yeah, but take a look. Really look at what I have. 3x divided by 3. That's just x. 15 divided by 3. That's just 5. Now, even if you don't completely understand every step, because all I'm doing in this lesson is doing 6 examples where I do the exact same thing every time. Even if you don't completely understand it, at least appreciate the beauty of what I've accomplished. Initial question, nasty fractions. By the way, that question could have been handled just by multiplying by 3 right off the hop. I'm getting ready. Look at this mess coming up, right? So if you think you could have handled this another way, you probably could have. I'm doing it this way so I can get ready for tougher questions. The beauty, though, is this had fractions and this does not. Now we go back. Once the fractions are gone, we go back to everything we learned before. What did we learn before? We learned the goal is to get x by itself. My poster up there, x equals number. That's the goal in grade 9 equation solving. Get x by itself. X is not by itself over here. It's got a plus 5 over there. Are these words now ringing a bell? Now they're coming back to you from 10 days ago. How do I get rid of plus 5? Yeah, so I'm going to do minus 5 to both sides. And to really dramatize it, for the first time back in 10 days, I'm going to write the minus 5 and say, okay, if I do minus 5 to that side, I also have to do minus 5 to this side. And so what I get here is x equals negative 50. Now, if you're stunned by the fact that the fractions never came up in that question, that's the beauty of what I've just showed you, is that when there's fractions in an equation, not in just any situation, you want to go home and do a recipe tonight, and there's a quarter cup plus a third a cup, you still have to do fractions. because it's not an equation. But when it's in an equation, from here forever, you can clear out the fraction right just by multiplying by a magic number. The magic number here was 3. How did I choose the magic number? It might be obvious. No trick question here. It might just be simple as anything. What did I how did I choose the 3 as the magic multiplier here? The denominator. The denominator is the magic number. Now we got to do a little bit better. I've got to add a couple words to that. The denominator. There's another word I got to use yet, because this one only had one denominator. Yeah? Okay. I want to show you something else, though, just to throw this in. And I ask a specific question that's in the test, is to use a left side, right side check to make sure it's right. You don't have to formally do this every time, but in later grades we really do use this a lot. And instead of writing L left side, right side, we actually write LS, RS. So this is left side, and this is right side. And all I'm doing is checking if my answer is right. There's a couple people asked me last chapter, like, can I check my answer here? And I was like, there's no easy way to check your answer. But in this chapter, we can. I can go take this negative 50, add the 5, divide by 3. Negative 50 plus 5, you get out your calculator, you punch it in, get negative 45. That's got to be divided by 3. I get negative 15. And on this side, it already was negative 15. And now I'm very excited because I know my answer worked. That's how you check to see if these things work, is you take the x value you think is right, sub it back into both sides, and you should get something that's equal. Any questions about that one? Hopefully it brought back a little of the equation solving from 10 days ago. If you left here on that Friday, set down your math, and haven't looked at it since. I'm trying to review that a little bit within this lesson. Okay, we have to add a little bit. Kent said multiply by the denominator. This one's got 2 denominators. It's got a 3 and a 2. We need someone with a brilliant plan. A brilliant plan to be able to multiply by both those denominators at once. I want to multiply by 3, but this one says I also want to multiply by 2. What number allows me to multiply by 3 and 2 at the same time? Right, or 6. So to add an extra word to what Ken said earlier, he said multiply by the denominator, because there was only one. Of course he said multiply by the denominator. But I'm going to add an extra word now and say our magic trick means multiply by the common denominator. Right? I'm going to write that in a fancy box in just a second. So if you're like, oh, I got to write that down. Yeah, I know. It's going to be reviewed in just a second to have the whole trick in one box. But for now, I just want to use it again. I'm going to multiply both sides by the magic number 6. So I got x over 3 plus x over 2 equals 10. Do you see how I wrote this, though? On purpose, I've left some spaces in there to write in my multiply by 6. You see, I'm going to multiply this one by 6. I'm going to multiply this thing by 6. I'm going to multiply this thing by 6. Everything gets multiplied by 6. Totally allowed in equation solving. You can multiply by anything you want when you're equation solving, as long as you multiply everything by that number. Now, I'll do the easy one first. 6 times 10, 60. This just takes a minute. This is the only fraction part of fraction equation solving, is that this 6, you almost always want it over 1. I didn't need it over 1 over here because I was just multiplying by 10, but anytime you're multiplying by fractions, you put it over 1. So this one becomes 6x over 3. I just go numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. This one becomes 6x over 2. Numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. And it's at that moment you lose faith in the method. You go, well, so you multiplied by 6. All you did was make the numbers bigger. That didn't really help at all. Thanks a lot, Mr. Todd. That's not a great piece of advice. But what do you notice about these terms? What is 6x divided by 3? You just divide them, right? 2x. It's good. And what about this one? 6x divided by 2. 3x. Fraction's gone. Magic. It feels like cheating. The whole time it feels like, yeah, but what happened to the fractions? Like, you didn't have to do it as a fraction question because you could just multiply the fractions out of the whole thing. Then you get a beautiful equation to work with. In fact, I'll draw a line and say, this is now a review of what we were doing before you left. I can simplify this. 2x and 3x means 5x. My goal is to get x by itself. X is not by itself. It's being multiplied by 5. What's the opposite of multiplying by 5? Divide them both by 5. And I get x equals 12. And I'm going to change colors again. And I'm going to go over here and do this left side, right side check. Because it's really going to help you on your test. When you're like, oh, I hope I got the right answers. You just quickly do a left side, right side check. You go, all us mathematicians, we always do LS and RS. Left side and right side, because we love short forms. The right side is 10. I think the answer is 12. And so I put it in here. I go 12 divided by 3 plus 12 divided by 2. Let's see, 12 divided by 3 is 4. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And I get 10. Left side, right side, check. Where I go, yes, it's the right answer. So good for checking your answers. You might not use it in the homework a whole lot because you'll just check the back of the book. But let's say you check the back of the book and it doesn't match up and you're like, oh, this back of the book is wrong. Then you can try left side, right side. But I encourage you to try it because I literally ask you on the test one time. Try it out. Use the left side, right side check. So a few times in the homework, 3 or 4 times, say, I'm going to try out this left side, right side check and make sure I got it down pat. Okay? Do you have any questions? Only 4 slides I got to do. I'm already done the first one. More time? Who needs more time here? Remember, you got the swipe thing. If I go too fast, you just swipe your hand and I'll swipe back to you. A great trick for dealing with fractions in equations. Here it is. I want to say it in the fewest number of words as possible. Multiply everything on both sides by the, common denominator. Now you're copying that down. I'm going to add to my to-do list today, which is check the courtyard. Are there any questions about the trick? Is the goal of the trick clear? We're not going to have to do much fraction work. Once we multiply by the common denominator, fractions are basically going to be gone. It feels like cheating. Feels like we're up to something, and we're not. This is what we do all the way through. My grade 12s last week, we were using this trick. Okay, let's just multiply everything by x or y or whatever we were working with to get rid of the denominators. I'm going to make this question bigger. 2x over 5. Little management trick here. I want to notice how I write this. I'm getting ready. Do you see what I did there? I just spaced it all out to give myself some room to move. This question has fractions. What do you suggest we do to deal with these fractions? Big moment of the lesson. If you know what to do here, you're going to find this homework pretty fast and pretty straightforward. Ooh, except for the 2 tough ones. There's 2 really tough questions on the homework today. 15 and 16. Not test type questions. When I put stars on them, I'm like, this wouldn't be on a test. But if you can do these, you'll be ready for whatever comes in the test. They're good practice questions. Okay, I gave you enough time to think it over. What would you like to do here? Pick out the common denominator, which here is 15. There might be a better choice. Sometimes, you know how that common denominator, sometimes there's a better, lower choice. But just multiplying them together will always work. If you're not sure, just go, okay, 5 times 3, 15. You're going to multiply everything on both sides by 15. I'm going to write it in red. So I'm going to multiply this by 15 I'm going to multiply this by 15. I'm going to multiply this by 15. And the one on the right-hand side is the easiest one to multiply by 15 because it's not a fraction. But those ones on the left are both fractions. What do we got to do with our 15 to make it ready to multiply by fractions? Because it's not a fraction as it is. Okay, so yes, so when we say we want to multiply by 15, sometimes we use 15 over 1 when we need to. And then it's just numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. Twice like that. And at that point, again, it's easy to lose faith in this method after you see that and go, that didn't do anything but make the numbers bigger. But look at the terms. The magic number of the common denominator is perfect for setting this up. 30 divided by 5, 6x. 15 divided by 3, 5x. And this question is so good, by the time you simplify, you really don't have any other work to do. Is it right? How could you check? What would you do to check this one? We check at the back of the book. Hey, great move. Love the check at the back of the book move. Do it. But if you had to do it on a quiz or a test, what would you do here? Do left side, right side check. Put the 60 in there and see if it comes out to 4. I can do it in my head. 2 times 60 is 120 divided by 3 is 24. That's 20. 24 minus 20 is 4. But you see, lots of times you can't do it in your head, and that's why the left side, right side check is so good for those. Questions about that one? More time? My brain's already exploding. It's 9:33 on Tuesday after Thanksgiving. Let's just fast forward so we can see what's a crazy one and an easy one. That's all we got left. 2 examples left to go. This crazy one is meant to start to get you ready for those really tough questions in the homework that are coming. I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to space it out. To get ready. Crazy fractions all the way through. I think I wrote one on the board like this at the start of the chapter to say, here's where we're going to get to. Really crazy looking. Well, we've got a trick now to deal with all these fractions in here. We're going to multiply through by the magic number. How do we decide what the magic number is? Yeah, we're looking for that common denominator. And what is the common denominator here? 20. 20 is the best choice here. There's sometimes other choices, but I'm going to multiply everything by 20. So this x gets multiplied by 20. This 1/4 gets multiplied by 20. This mess gets multiplied by 20. And this thing gets multiplied by 20. Everything gets multiplied by 20. Some of them are easy to do when you do this, when you multiply by 20. For instance, over here, 20 times 2, 40. Easy stuff. 20 times x, nothing to write. Just 20x. You might not even need a separate line to do those ones. This one, though, if I'm going 20 times 1/4, I've got to go put this over 1, and so I get 20 over 4. That's not so bad. And here's the one I was trying to get to the whole lesson, is 20 times 2x minus 1 over 5. Here's where 2 tricks got to come in together. You've got to be able to multiply by 20, but also do distribution. So this 20 gets multiplied by the 2x, but it also gets multiplied by the -1. So if you want, red star this example for when you get to the homework, for when you get one that has distribution within it. So here I get 40x minus 20 all over 5, which I totally get it when you're seeing these the first time. You're like, that did not help. Your multiplying by 20 thing just does not help. Look at the mess it made. But if you look at the individual terms, you'll find that it does help dramatically. 20x, I don't have to do anything with. 20 divided by 4. No more fractions. We can deal with this. 20x minus 5. And then this one, divide them both by 5. 8x minus 4. And even if the method is like, okay, I sort of get it. It's going to need some practice. You at least have to see the beauty. Compare this equation, trying to solve this mess, to this one. What a difference. It's beautiful. Okay, here's the review. if you're feeling overwhelmed because all of this stuff flew out of your brain from a week ago, here's what I taught the week before. Collect like terms. 20x and 8x go together for 28x. -5 and -4 go together for -9. I saw a hand. Was there a question? You were just trying to help me on the next step? Then, x is not by itself. It's being multiplied by 28, and then there's the subtract 9. So to isolate it, I got to get rid of subtract 9 first. Well, why subtract 9 first? I thought we did multiply first. Is it BEDMAS says multiply first, then add and subtract? Why am I doing it in reverse here? When I'm doing equation solving, why do we do it BEDMAS in reverse? Well, that's what equation solving is all about. Equation solving is about doing it in the opposite order, doing the reverse of things. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And I get 28x equals 49. Divide both sides by 28. And I get x equals 49 over 28. What a scary looking fraction. But it does reduce. I think they both divide by 7. So I get 7/4. Questions on that mess? Again, if the steps after here are still confusing for you, well, don't panic. You sort of had that down pat before we left. We just got to brush the rust off it because you've been off for 9 days. The only new thing I'm doing today is multiplying by a common denominator. Do you have questions? Who has questions? More time? Last one. Go back. Did someone say go back? 8 plus 1/3 x equals 13. Our trick today is multiply by the common denominator. There's only one denominator in this one, so I'm going to multiply everything by 3, multiply this by 3, multiply this by 3, and multiply this by 3. Some of them are easy, but when they're not easy, what do we do with the 3 so that we can multiply these fractions? Just put it over 1. So here I get numerator times numerator, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. And things simplify up nicely here. I did this one after the really tough one to let you know that just because it has fractions in it doesn't mean it has to be ridiculous. This was ridiculous. Some of the fraction questions with only one denominator are pretty straightforward stuff. X is not by itself here. It has 24 added to it. How do I get rid of adding 24? So I got to subtract 24 from both sides. And I get x equals 50. These things take practice, but they go well when you do practice. If you could do chapter 2, practicing chapter 3 is not going to be a big problem. It'll come faster than chapter 2 did. Well, is there any questions on that example? More time? More time. I'm going to do one more page. It's going to be a beautiful page. It's going to be an algorithm for solving equations. It's going to say, here, do this, then do this, then do this. So when you get to a homework question that is a little bit big and scary, this says, here, this is the order of doing these steps. Here's the whole thing, solving equations. Well, this is the whole thing in grade 9. I got to tell you, every time you take a math course, you learn new ways to solve different kinds of equations. But for us, this is the whole story. This is solving equations in a nutshell. 1, distribute to expand brackets. That's the last lesson I taught you last week. Do that first. If there's brackets there that you can use, that you can distribute with, yes, do that first. 2, do what I just said in this lesson, which is 2. Multiply by the common denominator. By the way, I'm just going to change those to question marks. Because if there's no brackets to distribute, you don't have to do that step. If there's no fractions to deal with, you don't have to do this step. 3. Move variables to one side. 4. Move numbers to the other side. You can interchange these steps, by the way. Basically, those two steps say isolate x. And there's often the last step, and it's almost always divide. But it doesn't have to be divide, but it almost always is. Do you notice that in all the questions we did? I'm going to come back to this slide in a second, but you notice on the last step it was like, we divided by 28. Here, we didn't have to divide in that one. Subtract 5, but you know how at the end it always seems like that last step will be divide if it's there. I'm going to write this on the board later as well because I want you to have it all through. Are there any questions on this plan?